Can you introduce yourself, please?
My name is Courtney Smith. I am a Loyola University student. I'm a senior and I'm majoring in biology.
Great. And what made you move from the southwestern part of the United States up to Chicago?
Well, I was actually born in Chicago, and then my family and I moved to Phoenix when I was about 2. And so I definitely have Chicago roots, and being in the Southwest has been great, but I've always felt this pull to the Midwest. Like I really wanted to experience something different. And every time I would come visit to Chicago, I would always say, like, my heart beats differently when I'm in the city. And I know that sounds kind of corny, but it's definitely true. I think just like being in a big city like Chicago where you can easily access different, venues or places or concerts or museums is so cool. And that's something that you don't really get a lot of in Phoenix because it's based a lot on driving in cars. So you have to commute a lot, but it's not very easy to like go downtown for the day or something like it is actually living in Chicago.
Sure, and a lot of what you said plays into the title of the blog, Nostalgic Navigation. So what do you think in general pulls people to a city? I know you referenced what pulls you to Chicago, but what do you think pulls you somewhere?
I think it definitely has to do with the culture of the city. I think Chicago for sure is like a melting pot, and so I think it's neat because there's so many different neighborhoods that are like different pockets of culture. And so for some people, that's a really big draw to be able to experience different, museums or plays or types of concerts. And so I think that big cities are able to offer so many different types of activities for people to do. So even if like two different people have completely different attitudes or interests, they can find something that they both like in a big city.
And how has your perception of Chicago changed after living here? I know, especially after my experience abroad, a city isn't always what you think it will be. So is it the same as what you were thinking it would be like to live here or different?
I think it's definitely different. When I would visit Chicago when I was younger, we did a lot of the touristy things like Michigan Avenue and, that kind of thing, like State Street. But after living here for the past 4 years, I really realized that there's so much than just the Magnificent Mile. I mean, I've gone to so many different neighborhoods like Pilsen and, there's Rogers Park where Loyola is and Wrigleyville. There's so many different parts to Chicago that people don't even necessarily hear about unless they're actually living here. And I think it's those little like hidden gems or those family-owned, coffee shops across the street that you just walk into, or a bookstore on the side of the street that looks a little bit like nobody's actually gone in there, but you just walk into. It's those little things that actually make the city what it is. And it's so much more than what, attracts tourists.
Do you have any personal hidden gems that you frequent a lot that you would consider would be your favorite?
Ooh, that's a good question. I definitely think the coffee shop by Loyola is a hidden gem. I mean, from the outside looking in, you see a lot of different types of furniture and it doesn't necessarily coordinate. It's not your Starbucks that you see on the corner. But you walk in and you feel like you're at home. It's a great place to study when you're kind of feeling a little burnt out of the library or of your own room. And it's a great haven for students to go to. And I think it's definitely underrated, but it's one of those places that you walk into and you feel like, yeah, this is a great place to be, and you feel like you're welcome there, and the people who work there are really sweet too.
You almost feel like part of the heartbeat of the city when you're in places like that.
Exactly.
So on the flip side of that, do you think that the tourist hotspots, so to speak, diminish the spirit of Chicago or take away from what a city stands for? Or are they necessary for a city to thrive in terms of tourism?
I don't think that it takes away from the city. I think it's a big draw for people to get to the city. And so I think, in that aspect, it's definitely necessary to draw people to your city. Otherwise, nobody would come if nobody knew what there was to do. So, the museums that are right off of Michigan Avenue and like the aquarium that's right there. I mean, those are big tourist attractions, but those are also things that like people who live in the city like to go to as well. And of course, like the shopping gets a little bit chaotic with all the tourists. But that, again, I think is part of the city, but it's not the only aspect. So I think it's necessary to draw people in, but if people are like adventurous enough to maybe go off the beaten path a little bit and, you know, step off the Magnificent Mile, they'll kind of get an even deeper look at what the city, like the spirit actually is.
Do you have any other cities in, whether it's the US or the world, that you feel like you have a grasp of that off the beaten path experience that isn't your hometown?
Oh, that's a good question too. I would say San Francisco. I've gone there a few times, and I think it's one of my favorite cities. I love it there, and I kind of got to know a little bit more of the, you know, off the beaten path places because we had some friends who lived there and showed us little restaurants that nobody, you know, who was a tourist would know about, and it was those little places that I just like felt like, yeah, I'm, you know, person living in San Francisco, even though I was just a visitor. I think that's kind of when like you really know, when you actually feel like you're like that city is your home and you're not just a tourist. Like that's when you know you've kind of found those hidden gems, or you've found those places that are not necessarily the big tourist attractions and that kind of thing.
And local perspectives are key for that, because as a tourist you just wouldn't know where those things are.
Exactly.
To begin with. So as someone from a different part of the country, how did you go about navigating Chicago in your own way?
I think it was really just a lot of courage and being able to hop on the L and maybe like get off a stop that I've heard a lot of people talk about, like Belmont, for instance. I don't think I would have really known about that until like somebody told me, like, hey, have you ever been down there? Like, or Fullerton, like those stops right off the L. And I think just like having the courage to ask a new friend, like, hey, do you want to just, you know, go explore the city a little bit? That definitely helped, and Loyola also provided a lot of really good resources during our first year of like kind of different things to do. And with our first year seminar, like counseling class, we got to do a project where we could explore like a different part of the city and then talk about it and everything. So that also kind of helped to, you know, build courage to experience a new place. And then also, with my parents both being from this area, they of course like told me their own, you know, great places that they love to go to and stuff like that. So I think it was just a lot of, you know, talking with other people who are from this area, and then also being willing to try new things too myself.
Sure. I think one thing that I've learned and that I find so fascinating is that you could have millions of people living in one city and it means something different to each one of them.
Exactly.
Which is the beauty of places, in my opinion. So on that note, when you graduate, what memories will stick out the most to you about Chicago as a city? Not necessarily your experiences, but what about Chicago will you take with you?
I think one thing for me that I love about Chicago is that even though it's a big city, I still feel like it's a small town atmosphere. Like I can be, you know, walking down the street and, you know, surrounded by buildings, yet at the same time, I still feel like everybody has that Midwestern comforting spirit that they're just willing to like help anybody out who needs it. They work hard, and it's that atmosphere of the city itself that I think I'll take away for sure, just because everybody's so proud to be a Chicagoan. And that's something that, like, I don't know, being from Phoenix is kind of a new city, so I don't think that people really have that pride yet. But Chicago, I mean, it's been established for so long, there's so much history here that people are just genuinely proud to say that they're from Chicago. And so I think I'll definitely take like that aspect of pride and just that atmosphere of being in a city that you love. I'm definitely going to take that away with me.
Sure. And then one last question for you. So if you were to be in my position writing a nostalgic navigation blog about Phoenix, where you've grown up, what are a few places that you would share with people that they wouldn't know just landing in the airport and wandering around by themselves?
I would definitely say that we have a lot of really good restaurants, and there's some that are kind of not necessarily downtown, but they're in more of like the suburb type areas. And there's this one really great place called Le Grand Orange.